Life often presents unexpected situations. I have a story that I haven't shared with many people because it's complicated. Have you ever felt like you were walking a fine line between right and wrong? Not because you wanted to, but because of the circumstances you found yourself in? That was how I felt on that particular day, as if the universe had a twisted sense of humor and I was its target. It all started on a regular Saturday afternoon. I wasn't doing anything extraordinary, just going about my day during a relaxing weekend. I was doing some housework with only the soft hum of the dryer in the background. While sorting through my closet to find things to donate, I came across an old miniskirt. Even though I no longer wore such clothes, I thought I had outgrown that phase. However, as I held the skirt in my hands, memories flooded back. It was a reminder of my youth, a time when confidence came easily and life was about enjoyment and freedom. On a whim, I decided to try it on. I didn't expect much, but when I looked in the mirror, I couldn't help but laugh. The skirt fit me more snugly than I remembered, highlighting both the parts one wasn't too fond of and perhaps some I was. It was just a quick experiment to see if it still fit when I heard a knock at the door. Who could that be? I wondered aloud. My hair was messy, and I wasn't dressed to impress. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I saw my nephew, Jason. He was no longer a child. At 22, he had grown into a strong, confident young man with broad shoulders. He had a presence about him that could easily capture attention. He had a bag of tools with him and was smiling casually as he always did. "Annie, you called about the leaky faucet," he said. I suddenly remembered that I had completely forgotten to ask him to come over and fix the sink in the guest bathroom. Although I felt a little embarrassed by my appearance, I didn't make a big deal out of it and just laughed. "Right, please come in. The bathroom's down the hall," I said. He walked past me, and I noticed he paused for a brief moment, his gaze flickering toward me before quickly looking away. Maybe I was imagining things, but there was something strange about the moment. Jason got to work on the sink while I returned to my closet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't a negative energy, just an unspoken tension. Do you know the feeling when someone's gaze lingers just a little too long, even when they try to be subtle? At first, I dismissed it as overthinking, especially since he's my nephew. But as I walked past the bathroom to grab something from the kitchen, Jason suddenly called out, "Annie, could you come here for a second? I think I need some help," he said. When I entered the bathroom, I saw Jason crouched down with his sleeves rolled up, showing off his muscular arms. He was holding a wrench in one hand and pointing at the faucet with the other. "I think the pipe is stuck," he said, glancing up at me. "Could you hold this while I try to loosen it?" I nodded and leaned in to grab the faucet. The bathroom was small, and before I realized it, we were standing very close to each other. I tried to ignore the closeness, but I could feel the warmth of his arm brushing against mine as he worked. I looked at him, and that's when I noticed it. Jason wasn't just focused on the pipe. His eyes were often on me, shifting away only when I caught him looking. It was subtle, but I could tell that I tried to break the silence. "Is everything going okay?" I asked. He looked at me, a bit reluctant at first, but then he smiled, his usual relaxed smile. I laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, you're the expert, right?" I said. There was no pressure, but I couldn't ignore how his gaze lingered on me just a little too long. After a few more minutes, he finally finished, standing up and brushing his hands on his pants. "All done. Should be good as new," he said. "Thank you," I replied, trying to act normal. "You're a lifesaver," he said, leaning against the counter, his expression unreadable. "You know, Annie, I don't think I've ever seen you dress like that before." I froze for a moment, feeling my cheeks turn red. "Oh, this?" I said with an awkward laugh, tugging at the hem of the miniskirt. "It's just something I found in the back of my closet. I was going to donate it." Jason stayed silent, still gazing at me. His eyes showed an emotion I couldn't quite read. Then he smiled again, but this time it felt different, almost like he understood something. "It suits you," he said, his tone gentler than usual. I was at a loss for words and could only stammer. "Thanks, I suppose." Feeling self-conscious all of a sudden, I quickly turned to go to the bathroom, hoping to put some space between us. But as I stepped out, Jason followed, his footsteps close behind. "Auntie," he called, stopping me in the hallway. I turned to face him, my heart racing. "Yeah?" I asked, feeling nervous. He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Have you ever felt like something happens for a reason?" "What do you mean?" I asked. Genuinely confused, he opened his mouth to say something, then shook his head and laughed it off. Never mind. Forget I said anything. But I couldn't forget the way he looked at me, or the tone of his voice. It stayed with me long after he left that day. That night, I curled up on the couch, mindlessly flipping through channels, trying to shake off the awkwardness from earlier. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was just overthinking it. After all, Jason was family. But just as I started to feel a little normal again, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I leaned over and picked it up. It was a message from Jason. "Hey, Andy, can I ask you something?" I stared at the screen, unsure whether to respond. Why was he messaging me now? After a few moments, I replied, "Of course. What's on your mind?" His response came almost instantly. "I keep reflecting on today and you." It felt different. His words left me stunned, and my stomach fluttered a bit. What was he trying to say? I hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard, trying to figure out how to respond. Eventually, I decided on a neutral reply. "I was just trying on some old clothes." I sent it, but I saw the typing indicator appear almost immediately. After a moment, his reply came, and it surprised me. "You seemed very beautiful." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. Was it just a compliment, or was there more to it? I wasn't sure how to feel or how to respond. After what felt like an eternity, I texted back, "Thanks, Jason. I appreciate the compliment." I hoped that would end the conversation, but I had a feeling it wouldn't. He responded again, "I'm not sure how to say this, but I felt something today." "Did you?" My breath caught in my throat. I was treading into dangerous territory, and I wasn't sure how to navigate it. Jason wasn't just an acquaintance, he was my nephew. If he was feeling something, it wasn't right. Still, instead of shutting him down immediately, I hesitated, unsure whether to address his feelings or just move on. After a moment, I decided not to reply right away. I watched the typing bubble reappear, and then I retracted my previous statement, hoping to avoid any more discomfort. I exhaled shakily, trying to reassure myself that it was all a misunderstanding and that things would return to normal. But as I set my phone down, I knew that this wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The following morning, while I was starting my day with a cup of coffee, still disheveled, I heard a knock at the door. My heart raced. I wasn't expecting any visitors. When I opened the door, there stood Jason, hands in his pockets, looking more serious than usual. His casual, carefree smile was absent, replaced by an expression I didn't recognize. I tried to hide my surprise. "What are you doing here so early?" I asked. He stepped in without waiting for an invitation. "I was in the area and thought I'd drop by." His explanation seemed flimsy. Jason didn't live anywhere near here, but I didn't confront him about it. I just closed the door and followed him into the living room. He sat on the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The air was heavy with unspoken tension. "Is everything okay?" I asked, sitting down. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "About last night, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." I let out a small sigh of relief. At least he was acknowledging the awkwardness. "It's okay, Jason. Let's just forget about it." But he shook his head. "I can't just forget. It's about you, Auntie." I meant what I said. I froze, unsure how to respond. This wasn't how families should talk to each other. I tried to stay calm. Jason, I think you're mistaken. These feelings you're having, they're not real. He looked at me with a steady gaze, his voice firm but not aggressive. I know it might be wrong, but I've been trying to suppress it. I felt a wave of emotion hit me. Shock, confusion, and a little shame. How did we get to this point? Jason, you have to stop. You're my nephew, and this isn't right. He nodded slowly, his eyes dropping to the floor. I understand. I know it's wrong, but I couldn't keep it inside anymore. The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I was at a loss for words, unsure of how to fix this or if it could even be fixed. Finally, I stood up, needing some space. Jason, I think you should leave, I said quietly. We both need time to think about this. He looked at me, his face a mix of regret and longing. Okay, he whispered, but this isn't the last time we'll talk about this. He left without saying anything else. When the door closed behind him, I felt a strange mix of relief and lingering anxiety. Later that evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the living room, I noticed an envelope sticking out from beneath the front door. My chest tightened. I knew who it was from before I even picked it up. I opened the letter with shaky hands, my heart racing in my chest. The handwriting was clearly Jason's, neat and precise, as if each word had been carefully chosen. The message read, Annie, I know you asked me to leave, and I respect that, but I cannot pretend these feelings don't exist. I'm not asking for anything from you. I only need you to understand that if you want me to distance myself, I will do so without hesitation. However, if there's even a small chance that you feel the same, please let me know. I will be waiting for your response. I stood there, staring at the words, unsure whether I should feel anger, flattery, or fear. A storm of thoughts flooded my mind. Is he serious? Could he really feel this way? I didn't want to believe it, but a part of me hesitated to dismiss it entirely. I folded the paper and tucked it away in a drawer, out of sight but not out of mind. I told myself that I wouldn't react, and that ignoring him was the best course of action. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Later that night, as I tried to sleep, my phone vibrated again. It was a message from Jason. I understand I told you I wouldn't disturb you, but I need to know if you received my message. I stared at the screen, uncertain of how to reply. Finally, I typed back, Yes, I received it, but Jason, this must stop. His reply came almost immediately. It's harmful to both of us. I will stop if that's what you want. Please, just let me know if you feel anything for me. Even a little. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Admitting anything would only make things worse, but denying it felt dishonest. After a long pause, I typed, Jason, you're my nephew, and that's all it can ever be. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the only one I could give. The next morning, I arrived at work, eager to distract myself from the recent events. My job was my sanctuary, a place where I could focus on tasks and forget about personal issues. But as I sat at my desk sorting through emails, I had the uneasy feeling that someone was watching me. I looked up and froze. Jason was standing just outside the office window, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked both conflicted and determined. What was he doing here? I murmured under my breath, feeling my chest tighten. I quickly excused myself and stepped outside before he could come in and make things even more awkward. Jason, what are you doing here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I needed to see you, he said quietly, his tone earnest. You didn't respond to my message last night. Jason, I said, my voice strained. I've told you that the situation is unhealthy. We can't keep having this conversation. He stepped closer. You didn't refute it, he said, his voice low. This isn't about emotions, Jason, I said, stepping back. It's about morality. Whatever you think this is, it's wrong. He raked his hand through his hair. I know it's wrong. I've reminded myself of that countless times. But I can't control my feelings. His words hung heavy in the air, and I felt lost for a response. I started to walk away, But then he called out, "Annie, wait." He gently grasped my arm, his touch soft but firm, and I froze, looking down at his hand before meeting his gaze. There was a raw vulnerability in his face, and for a moment, it was hard to just walk away. "I'm not trying to ruin your life or complicate things," he said. "I just need to know if there's any possibility of something more. If there isn't, I'll leave you alone. You'll never have to see me again." The weight of his words hit me like a physical blow. The idea of him cutting ties with me was heartbreaking, but I knew that continuing down this path would only cause more pain for both of us. "Jason," I said, my voice trembling, "your family. That's all this can ever be." He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping as he took a step back. "Okay, I understand," he said quietly. "I'll stop interfering." As he walked away, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness, believing that this was finally the end and that we could move forward. But later that evening, everything changed. I received a call that shattered my peace. Jason had been in an accident. The call came late, just as I was preparing to go to bed. My phone vibrated on the coffee table, and when I saw Jason's name, my stomach dropped. But it wasn't Jason on the other end. It was a woman's voice from Mercy General Hospital. "Your nephew has been in an accident," she said. "He's requested your presence." Panic surged through me, and without asking any more questions, I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door. When I arrived at the hospital, my heart pounded in my chest as I rushed through the yard doors. I scanned the room until I saw him. Jason was lying on a bed, a minor cut on his forehead and his arm in a sling. He looked up as I approached, his face pale, but his eyes still held the same intensity. "What happened?" I asked, concern lacing my voice. He gave me a faint smile. "It was just a little collision." I frowned, irritation mixing with worry. "You really caused me a lot of concern." He chuckled weakly, then grimaced, clutching his side. "Sorry, Auntie. I wasn't sure who else to call." I sighed, pulling a chair close to his bed. "I'm here now. Are you okay?" "Yeah," he nodded, his demeanor softening. "But there's something I need to tell you." "Jason, now is not the time," I said gently. He shook his head. "I didn't contact you just because of the accident. I reached out because I've come to a realization." I looked at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" As we spoke, he nervously fiddled with the hospital blanket, his fingers twisting the fabric. "I've been thinking about the possibility of not surviving this, and my thoughts kept going to you. I realize how much I care about you and how many mistakes I've made. I didn't want to lose you." "Jason," I began, but he raised a hand to stop me. "Let me finish," he said. "I know I've crossed a line and I regret it, but what I feel for you isn't just some fleeting feeling. It's deeper than anything I've felt for anyone else, and I can't ignore it." His words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. Leaving me at a loss for what to say next, I was at a loss for words. Part of me wanted to console him, to assure him that everything would be fine. But another part of me understood that this wasn't something that could be fixed with kind words alone. Before I could gather my thoughts, a nurse entered the room, breaking the tension. "Visiting hours are over," she said with a polite, yet firm smile. I rose from my seat, feeling both relieved and overwhelmed. "Get some rest, Jason. We'll discuss this later." He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine as I exited the room. On my drive home, his words replayed in my mind, and I began to doubt whether I had made the right decision by leaving. But when I arrived home, I encountered an unsettling presence that made me question everything. The house was unusually quiet as I entered, the silence in the air palpable. After removing my shoes and walking into the kitchen, I noticed an unfamiliar small package sitting on the table. My name was written on it in Jason's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it, my hands trembling slightly. Inside, I found a letter and a small photo album. The letter began, "Annie, I know you asked me to stop contacting you, but I must explain everything. Even if this is our final conversation, Please read this and look through the album. If you want me to leave your life, I will respect that. But I couldn't keep these feelings hidden any longer. I unfolded the letter completely, my eyes scanning the words. From the moment I returned, I sensed a change between us. At first, I couldn't understand it. I thought it was just respect or admiration, but over time, it became clear that it was more. I've tried to resist it, but I can't ignore it anymore. You've always supported me more than anyone else. You've seen me at my lowest, and you still care. That means more to me than you'll ever know. I hesitated, my pulse racing. The weight of his words almost overwhelmed me, yet I continued reading. I put together this album to remind myself of everything I love about you, not in a way that crosses boundaries, but as a way to process my feelings. The photos in here are from family gatherings, moments when you were laughing, when you were just being yourself. I'm sharing this with you because I don't want to keep secrets anymore. I'll respect whatever decision you make, but I couldn't let this go unsaid. I set the letter down and opened the album. The photos were all too familiar. Family barbecues, holiday dinners, random snapshots I didn't even remember being taken. Each photo was accompanied by a note in Jason's handwriting, highlighting things he admired about me. How happy I looked, how kind I was to others, how much he respected my strength. Tears welled up in my eyes. It was overwhelmingly touching and deeply unsettling. I closed the album and sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of it all. Jason wasn't simply expressing infatuation. He was laying bare his heart in a way that was impossible to ignore. But what could I do? I couldn't simply dismiss him, because not only was it morally wrong, but it would also jeopardize our family. At the same time, completely excluding him felt harsh, especially considering the evident distress he was experiencing. Before I could decide on a course of action, my phone buzzed again. Jason had sent a message asking if I had received the package. He requested confirmation and said that if I wanted him to leave, he would be gone by tomorrow. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my emotions warring with my rational mind. He had placed a decision squarely in my hands, a choice that could change both our lives and the future of our family forever. Finally, I responded, asking Jason to come over the next day so we could talk. The following morning, he arrived on time, his body language a mixture of anxiety and cautious optimism. I invited him inside, and we sat across from each other in the living room. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken emotions. Jason, I began, my tone firm yet gentle. I've read your letter and looked through the album. I see how much thought and effort you put into them, and I can't deny their emotional impact on me. But we need to set boundaries, for both of our well-being. He nodded, his expression cautious but attentive. I understand, he said softly. I just wanted you to know. That's all. I leaned forward, taking a deep breath. I love you as family, Jason. That's the extent of my feelings for you. What you feel for me is probably rooted in admiration and gratitude, and that's fine. But we mustn't confuse those feelings for something else. If we do, it will only harm both of us in the end. He looked down at his hands, his face a mixture of relief and sadness. I understand, he said quietly. I don't want to lose you, Auntie. I'll try to let go of these feelings. I reached out and took his hand, applying just a little pressure. You won't lose me, Jason, but you need to take some time to understand what's really going on in your heart. Maybe talk to someone who can help you process all this. He nodded again, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of peace in his eyes. We sat in silence for a while, talking about lighter subjects, his plans for the future, his desire to focus on his career and hobbies. By the time he left, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Things weren't entirely back to normal, but Jason respected the boundaries I had set. He took the time to focus on himself and sought help to navigate his emotions. Over time, our relationship returned to what it had been before, supportive, familial, and free from confusion. It wasn't easy, but we both learned from the experience. I learned the importance of setting boundaries and confronting difficult issues head-on, while Jason found clarity and a stronger sense of self. Looking back, I'm grateful that we managed to navigate such a challenging situation without losing the bond that mattered most, family.